So people in narcissistic relationships would greatly benefit if, out of all the things they could focus on, they tried to focus on improving empathy in their narcissist. In the book Rethinking Narcissism, Dr. Malkin summarizes the whole book by saying that the focus on empathy is what will reduce the narcissistic symptoms and make this narcissist an enjoyable person to be around. And I can really relate with this because I understood that I struggled in relationships, but I thought it was my ADHD. And so I set alarms and I had reminders and I even had a calendar invites on my calendar to remind me to think of my partner. And what's interesting is that when you focus on improving the empathy, you naturally remember to ask them, hey, do you need something while I'm at the store? I thought of you, and so I got this for you. Like, those things actually come very naturally if you go and fix the empathy piece. And I think for those who are in partnership with the narcissist, it's more than just like being heard in those moments. It's all those little teeny cuts of not feeling seen that add up to making it so difficult to be with the narcissist. So whether you're a narcissist yourself or you're the loved one of a narcissist, this video is going to cover how to create an environment to improve empathy and how to actually make the improvements in yourself. So it's a really good video. We're also going to talk about some of the setbacks that can happen, some of the things that can actually get in the way of improving empathy. So we hope you stick around. This is going to be a good one. All right, babe, give us all the knowledge.
Oh my gosh. Well, the thing that stuck out to me the most while you were giving that little intro comment was how in the brainstorming session of this video, one of the things that we talked about was how even if we help someone recognize that they are a narcissist, it doesn't necessarily change what in the relationship is uncomfortable for you. So that's why we decided to move forward and talk about empathy in depth, was because we believe that's one of the core issues of why relationships with narcissists are so challenging. That's something we've had to work through quite a bit, and we've had so many conversations that sound a little bit like this. Hey, I just feel like you're not being empathetic with what I'm saying, or why are you being so cold in response to this? Or why are you not acknowledging what I just said? It was very vulnerable. You know, those are things that I've had to express a lot in our relationship. And at first, we didn't really understand what the issue was. And once we were able to tag it as a lack of empathy due to the narcissistic tendencies in between our dynamic, it allowed us to become more aware and have a name for what's happening so that we could focus on building more empathy. And the ripple effect of that is that those behaviors that were really frustrating or disconnecting started to improve.
Yeah, totally. And well, so we've got this video separated into two parts. One is for the loved one of the narcissist and how they can help just by creating an environment. And then the second half is going to be for the narcissist themselves and how they actually practice the empathy. And we actually wanted to preface all of this with just stating that this video isn't for everybody. We never want someone who is stuck in a narcissistic relationship with somebody who is unwilling to change. And we just never want someone to be stuck in an abusive relationship and think that at one point your person will change, because that might not be the case. And we believe that you should know how much energy you're willing to give, because that's what you're doing as the partner of a narcissist who's waiting to see if they can heal. You have to ask yourself, how much energy am I willing to give until I kind of pull the ripcord and exit this relationship? And if you need to exit the relationship, we do not blame you at all. And that's completely fine. So, but if you think that you want to try and help and, you love this person, you've got kids with this person, this message is for you. And so I wanted to preface that.
Yeah. So I think as I think about what my experience has been with Jordan, what comes up first is how my relationship with Jordan really patterned a lot of what my experience was in my life in general, meaning that this wasn't my first time being in this pattern. And so it was kind of like a fish in water. I didn't even realize that someone could be more empathetic. I was quite accustomed to men in my life being very non-empathetic and emotionally cold. And
Yeah, the fish in water is if you asked a fish, what's, how's the water you're swimming in, it would probably respond, what's water? Because it's so pervasive, they don't even recognize it. So you can just keep going, keep rolling.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so with that being said, I was so accustomed to empathy being unavailable that I didn't even really notice that there was a lack of empathy.
Yeah.
I tend to be quite empathetic, but I, for some reason, just didn't believe I deserved empathy. And I think that a lot of people who are partners with narcissists probably deal with some level of low self-esteem like I did and still do sometimes. It's not a perfect world, but I think that for me, that journey was to first just start to become aware of what the barriers to connection were between us and what was causing our conflicts. And oftentimes my own reactivity, whether it was getting angry or shutting down, came from the rejection of trying to open my heart and express something, or trying to be seen and understood, and being met with a lack of empathy. That was something that was really hurtful for me, even though I didn't really understand what it was. And so I think if you're experiencing a lot of feeling rejected, feeling reactive, and there's conflict, you might look at, how do I experience any empathy from my partner? And if not, how does that make me feel? How do I react to that? Because in order to be supportive to someone who's not good at expressing empathy, you kind of need to start by knowing how that's impacting you and how you're reacting to it. The reason why is because in order for anything to change, we have to very first start by creating a safe place for us to have this conversation. And sadly, it's not really a safe place to have this conversation if both parties are reactive.
Yeah.
So one person has to be willing to say, I'm going to take the first step towards building safety in this conversation. And I'm going to do that by first choosing to acknowledge where my reactivity is coming from and try to manage that. So that was the first thing for me, was just, how do I make this a safer place for this conversation? Right? Because if I'm yelling, hey, you're so non-empathetic and you're a bad guy, then it really just shuts the conversation down, and we didn't have a lot of success having that conversation. So,
well, that was a conversation with my ex too. It's like, hey, you're doing this wrong, bad dog type thing. And to a narcissist, any sort of attack like that just causes them to prickle up and get super defensive, because they already have a ton of shame for who they are as a person. To say that you're not showing up as a partner is just going to make them shame spiral. It's the whole reason narcissism exists, is because there's deep, deep shame around who they are as a person. And so if you point directly at it in semi-critical, they're so soft, in some critical way, they are, going to prickle up, put up their defenses, gaslight themselves, gaslight you, so on and so forth. So.
Yeah. So I think the very first thing that we can do is to decide that we want to create a culture of compassion in the relationship. And what that means to me is that you're willing to hold the pain of what's happening and the love that you have for yourself and each other at the same time. So pain is inevitable in life. And often if you're in a narcissistic relationship, there is a lot of pain there in the individual and in the relationship. And so being able to say, I'm going to hold this painful situation with love instead of judgment or anger or whatever. And anger is a natural byproduct. I'm not saying you can't be angry, but just trying to put your most compassionate foot forward and try to get your partner on board with you with that and say, hey, first things first, I want us to have a compassionate core. Meaning that whether it's your pain or my pain or a situation we co-created, we're going to hold that lovingly. I think that begins to cultivate safety in the space to have the conversation. The next is starting to describe what it feels like to you to not receive an empathetic response, and doing that really vulnerably.
Yeah.
So an example would be if I say, hey, when you make this decision, it really hurts me and I feel really unsafe with you. And he starts to prickle up and get frustrated and angry. Instead of getting angry back and causing a kind of an argument or a reactive tennis,
Yeah.
I'll try to say, hey, I can tell that what I said caused you to feel a way, and I need this space to talk about what's hurting me, and I need empathetic listening from you. If that's not available right now, then I can't have this conversation because it wouldn't be safe for me, and it would make me really sad because I'm feeling so tender inside right now, and I really need someone to listen and be empathetic. And often I would say that, and he would say, okay, I'll be empathetic, go. And I'd start to say the thing, and then you would say, it's not true, and it still wouldn't be empathetic. So I think just gentle modeling was huge, because I would take the back seat, let you say your thing, and say, yeah, I can really see why you'd feel that way. I understand. But I still just feel like when you responded, your heart wasn't really open to me. I didn't feel like you were able to receive what I said in your heart, like gently. So I would just redirect the conversation and kind of set boundaries as well over what conversation I wasn't willing to have. So in essence, I kind of put down the barrier or the boundary that I wasn't willing to have a conversation that wasn't met with empathy. And I think that helps to cultivate almost I don't know, it's like you inspire them towards wanting to learn empathy more. What would you say, babe?
Yeah, and I think you're letting the boundary do the talking, the boundary point out when it's wrong. So, like, it's one thing for you to say, look, you're not being empathetic. Look. And it's another to say, oh, like, we ran into my boundary, which is that if you're going to be unempathetic, I'm just going to pause until you feel ready for that. That's not a punishment. That's not a mean thing to say, but it's just like, oh, she decided that's something she needs, and it's not outrageous or out of the picture for her to say, I'm going to pause until you're ready to be empathetic, because it hurts too much when you're, blasting me when I'm in my vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
So
I think another thing that's important to state, just in case nobody really understands what empathy is the ability to allow yourself to feel what someone else is feeling. So you really get down on their level and get into what's happening with them. And so that's what I mean when I say I'm going to pause here if the conversation's not empathetic. What I'm actually saying is, if you're not willing to open your heart to feeling what I'm feeling with me and hold this conversation together, I am not feeling safe to have this conversation. And so you might have your partner say, well, I am being empathetic. I said, I'm sorry you feel that way. I am being empathetic. I didn't interrupt you. But you and I both know what it feels like when someone fully heard you out and when someone didn't.
Yeah.
And so I think that we can go more into depth about what empathy means to us and some examples. I just kind of want to get this cultivating a safe place piece out of the way. But
I just want to point out that I think that's a perfect thing to keep setting. Like, no, that you have to help the narcissist know what empathy actually is, because they might not come from a household where empathy is abounding. They might have been told their whole life, you're being a baby, you're too sensitive, and blah blah blah. So they're just going to repeat what they heard in childhood, and for a lot of people, they've never experienced true empathy to them, so they don't know how to give it back.
Yeah.
And you really actually had to train me, because I would show up with pity. I'd show up and be like, oh, that's so hard for you. Tap your head, and you'd be like, what's wrong? And you'd be like, I just still don't feel good. I'm like, well, I was trying to be empathetic. Like, yeah, but to be honest, it felt a little bit more like pity. Do you understand the difference? And you were so loving in your responses, and it took some time to get there, but I just really trusted. I'm like, she's not trying to pull one over on me. She's not trying to trick me or anything. Well, I thought that at first, but eventually I got to this point where you would say a statement like that, and I'd be like, oh, what do you mean? Well, pity is one thing and empathy is another. we'd open up ChatGPT and say, explain the difference, and let ChatGPT be the tiebreaker a lot. But so I hear a few things. You're saying, like, one is create a culture of compassion. Two is explain without criticizing how it's making you feel that they're not being empathetic. And then I'm also hearing for you to set boundaries.
Yeah. And in this conversation, this kind of segues perfectly into what I was going to say next, which is define your terms.
Yeah.
Like, define what empathy means for you. And there's a lot of language that people can use to describe what empathy means. But I think there's a really good analogy that we've used that has helped us be able to define what type of connection we are building towards. And I'd like to share that analogy. Do you think is that okay? Okay. So because you brought up pity, I think this is a good segue into this analogy. So in this analogy, there's one person who has crawled down or has fallen down into a pit. So we're imagining someone at the bottom of a pit. They're emotional. They're the one that's in distress, that's hurt, that's experiencing pain. And they're calling out for help and support. And the other person, let's say it's the narcissist in the relationship, just for this analogy, comes to the top at the edge of the pit and says, "Oh, hi, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm sorry that you're having a hard time down there. I'm sorry for you. Yeah, I'm sorry for you that you're down there." That's pity. That's when you say, "Oh, I'm sorry for you," and it's very removed. You're putting that person away and out of your heart, and you're mentalizing and thinking intellectually about the situation. I think that empathy is when you roll out a ladder, you crawl back down into the pit with the person, and you say, "Wow, look at this situation that we're in together." And you fully open up your heart and allow yourself to experience it with them and share that emotional burden. And your energy is very much so, how are we going to get out? And I think that was the conversation that we had that kind of helped shift the narrative. Was I said, I need you in the pit with me. And which means I need your heart to be open to feeling what I'm feeling and experiencing what my experience is like. Instead of maintaining a space of superiority where you're out of the pit, you're away from it, you're hands off. It doesn't feel good to say, "I'm sorry you're in the pit. Good luck with that." But it can be life-changing to say, "I'm here right next to you. You're not alone in this, and we'll find a way out of this pit together." And so I think defining that is the level of connection that you are seeking when you say, "I need more empathy between us," can help kind of start to put you in the right direction for what you mean when you say that.
Yeah. And I love that for, at least in our situation, you didn't give up. I was like, I think I did like 50% better the next time. And you're like, still not there. You're not in the pit yet. Okay, got it. And then like, maybe another 50% better. And you still just not there. And I think that one of the worst things that a partner of a narcissist can do is to not have your actual needs explained. To think to yourself, well, that's the best he can do. He tried his hardest and,
good enough.
I'll consider that love. But if it's not making you feel loved, if it's not making you feel better, like, expect more of them. And you can challenge them in a gentle way, very loving, and say, "I know you're trying your hardest. And I know that I'm more sensitive than the average person, but I just really need your help. Can you do more? Could you get in the pit with me? Can I please explain to you why that didn't work for me?" It's like you have to navigate it gentler, but narcissists aren't monsters. Like, they can listen to those things as long as you can avoid the shame a little bit and sidestep it. So,
yeah, I think that it's really important to know that in this conversation you might hit some little shame landmines.
yeah.
And so that's why I said number one was creating a culture of compassion, because there were times where I'd say, I'm just being very honest. And I think that it's important to be honest, because if you are not honest with them because you're trying to avoid triggering them, you're feeding their self-deception.
Yeah.
You're basically
You're allowing them to be tyrant toddlers running around,
Well, and you're feeding the image that they have of themselves as not being any part of the problem.
Yeah.
When you don't truthfully acknowledge that their behavior isn't working for the connection. And so I try not to say like you're wrong, but I do try to say that was not able to get us to the connection that I need.
Yeah.
And I think just being very honest about, I still can't feel that connection with you in this conversation. That's a gentle way of saying that, instead of, you still didn't get it. Take 3 on empathy. Like, I think that's going to be a hard one to take.
Absolutely.
But what I hear you saying is be honest.
Yeah.
And try to be gentle and compassionate in the process. So
and focus on yourself, not on the narcissist, right? Just focus on how it's making you feel.
Right. I'm not feeling connected. I'm not feeling connected yet. You're not being empathetic enough yet.
Yeah.
Taking accountability for your needs and how they could meet those needs even more deeply. That's what we're referring to. So after you said boundaries, which is 3, 4 would be defining terms, what empathy means to you. And in that conversation, gently redirecting them back into those terms if they seem to be misguided. And then the last thing would be dealing with the shame landmines when you do run into them, which is to treat them very compassionately. So when I would notice that he would get triggered with shame because he felt like he hadn't been empathetic enough, and then, it brings on this, I guess I'm just a horrible partner and I'll never be able to do this, and it kind of spirals, and
everything I'm trying isn't working.
Yeah.
You just don't care, but you just don't love me. I can't be who you want me to be. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of gets hijacked actually, because the conversation goes from me being sad and trying to get my needs met into now he's sad and shame spiraling and I can't have my needs met in that moment. That's where it takes a lot of compassion on my side to say, I can see that this conversation is causing you a lot of distress. Let me reassure you that I love you. You are enough for me. It's because you're enough that I'm willing to have this conversation. I'm working towards more connection with you. That is my goal. And I think that always bringing it back to my goal is connection with you above all else. It's not to be perfect. It's not to show you how you're wrong and you're a bad guy. It's to connect with you deeply, and empathy is a prerequisite for deep connection for every human being. And so I'm simply just trying to help us get there. It's not me against you. It's me and you together against this problem, which is that we're struggling to meet in the most empathetic place possible. And giving a lot of love and compassion, giving the conversation some space until people, both of you are regulated, and then trying again. And honestly, it does take a lot of practice.
Yeah.
And so that's the last thing I would say, is just to keep practicing this conversation. And I think with time, when you model that same empathy to them, when they're shame spiraling, when they aren't picking it up, or when they're having a hard day, if we can be that empathetic space, I think the modeling is the most important thing. But those are just some kind of quick and easy steps for how you can try to cultivate that space. Even though it's not necessarily your responsibility, you don't have to do this. But if you believe that your partner is on the precipice of awareness and healing and they just need a little nudge, I think that these little steps can make all the difference in reducing conflict and making that building of empathy more possible.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, so, that's probably part 1 of creating an environment for the narcissist to learn empathy. But at the end of the day, the narcissist still has to do it themselves. So let's talk a little bit about that. For me, it was wild to be 34, 35 and just now realizing I didn't know the difference between pity and empathy, or I didn't actually get when you were empathetic to me early on, I almost I felt like maybe you were being sarcastic, or maybe you were pulling one over on me somehow. It was, which is kind of sad, but it was just how I felt about the situation. But over time, you really did prove it to me. And I recognized that I had a problem being more empathetic. This is before I even understood that I had narcissism. I just knew I had an empathy problem, or I knew that the way I was showing it was not empathetic enough for you, you know? And so I think that what's important to realize is that narcissists are running from their emotions with their narcissism. They're using their narcissism to avoid all of it. Grandiosity is just a way of putting yourself above others so that you don't have to feel your own lowliness. You don't have to go feel your own unlovableness. And that's all that narcissism really is a way to avoid these emotions. So the first thing that a narcissist needs to do, and that's why they struggle with empathy, is because they're not feeling anything. There's a lot of ways they can try not to feel it. They can dissociate, numb their feelings. What I did is I was a toxic optimist, and, you would come to me with, hey, I'm feeling this or feeling that. And I would just basically try to blow sunshine up your ass and say, well, if you focus on it, then it becomes a problem. Then I just march off, whistling or something stupid. And it's I struggled to look at the pain of others because I actually think for my situation is I'm actually quite sensitive. And, so for me, it was really helpful to get in touch with my own emotions, to get in touch with all those feelings that I was running from. And when you realize that you are just as flawed and broken as anybody, and that's okay, but you can sit with your own pain, you can sit with other people's pain better as well. So I'd say step one is start finding ways to focus on your own pain. And then, and that's outside of any moment, but the rest of the steps are in the moment that you're with someone and you realize, oh, I got to be empathetic. This is literally how it was for me. It's okay, game face. What should I do? For me, I noticed it's really helpful to try and get into my body. And because when you're up in your head, the narcissism exists up here. It's an egoic thing. And for me, it might just be a few breaths, and trying to focus on my body a little bit. So what does it feel like where I'm sitting? What does my breathing feel like? And what I do is I bring my awareness from what sits up here in my head. And it's like an elevator. I slowly bring it down until it's sitting in my heart. And that just helps me. So I focus. So this brings me into step 3, which is focusing on my heart. And I focus on your heart. And at the same time, I'm just it's as if I'm listening to what you're saying, but I'm just very, my mind's eye is just right here. And something about that brings out the emotional part of it. And this is how our bodies work. If motion leads to emotion. And so if I wanted to work myself, if you squeeze your right hand really, really intensely, you'll start to feel anger in your body. So the body can create an emotion, and the emotion can create sensation, how the body moves. So this is kind of a trick within that world of focusing on your heart while you're listening is a way of actively listening and trying to feel their emotions a little bit. And yeah, the fourth part is just actually getting in the pit. And that can be hard, especially someone who's been just shut off from their emotions for so long. But what helped me at first was to try and imagine something similar to what they're talking about. So she would, talk about something that happened with her parents. And I'm like, well, that hasn't happened to me, but I have had this happen to me. And then I try to feel that. And once I feel it, I remember I used to have a list of things I should ask to be more empathetic to help my partner. And it was ask reflective questions, ask how that made them feel, this dumb list. And what was funny was when I started just being more empathetic, just getting myself into where you're at emotionally, just going there, I would naturally ask the right questions. So the last thing I want to say about when you start to open your heart to people, this was an unexpected thing for me, but it hurts. It hurts so bad. I can understand now why I avoided it for so long as a narcissist. And I can still remember it. We were in our room. You started explaining something to me and I was prepped and ready. Okay, focus, pay attention to her heart, be empathetic. And as your words started to penetrate, I just felt this like pain right here. And, Rumi says that you have to keep breaking your heart until it opens. And there's real truth to it. Like, this isn't an easy process. Like, it's a process that is painful, but that's how you let the light in, And so, being willing to experience that pain, I think, is really important. And this really, to all those narcissists who haven't had this before, the ability to be empathetic, this is a pretty cool superpower you get to take with you. Like, I truly enjoy now sitting down with somebody, like connecting with them. I pay attention to my heart. I'm really getting in with where they are, and they feel so seen. Like, this isn't just our relationship that's flourished. It's like my family, my friends, like I am just showing up for people. And what's cool is you just show up as a different person because you let their pain in a little bit. You're thinking of them. I have some friends that are going through some really deep relationship problems, and man, I resonate with that. I've been there before. And so like, I'm sitting there thinking of my friends in the middle of the day, and I'm shooting them text messages. Hey buddy, just thinking about you. And like, I'm kind of being the savior in this time in their life. And they've told me that, like, man, I have needed you. Like, you have just saved me right now because this is such a hard process that I'm going through. And I love being that person for somebody. And it really gives meaning to life. Narcissists struggle a lot with suicidal thoughts and feeling, life is hopeless and there's no meaning. And I feel like it's because they haven't experienced love all the way, because love's what gives this whole fucking thing meaning. And so it truly is an amazing experience to start to open your heart and to be able to strengthen your relationships and really be there for somebody. And I hope that as you all go on this journey that you get to have a similar experience, that your relationships can be strengthened through it, because it's kind of what we're here for. So,
yeah, I think one of the things that was helpful for me in knowing how to have a conversation about this too is just remembering that I think a lot of people who struggle with narcissism struggle with this really deep sense of separateness.
Yeah.
One thing we've talked about a lot is how you focused on yourself a lot as a form of self-preservation. Mm-hmm. Like, nobody's got my back, so I have to have my own back and always be looking at myself. Mm-hmm. And I can't look away from myself for 1 minute to look at you and your pain.
Yeah.
And I can't open my heart to you and your pain because I can't open my heart to my own pain. It's too overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I think for any people who are identifying as a narcissist who are listening to this, it's important to remember that if you're getting really overwhelmed in the process of opening up your heart, taking on emotions that could be ages old that you haven't let in before, or the fear that if you look away from yourself and start looking into someone else, that no one's going to have your back. I think it was helpful for us to have this conversation about our interconnectedness with everything.
Yeah.
And just remembering that we can feel really separate as human beings because our meat suits are separate and individuated, but really our souls and our hearts and our consciousness, there is this phenomena of connection that happens between us. And when we open our hearts up to that connection, we dissolve that feeling of separateness.
Yeah.
And so then we feel like, oh, now that my heart's open, I realize that I am connected to other beings around me. I'm not as separate as I thought. There is this general sense or feeling of, I'm going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. And I'm divinely supported in my journey. And I don't think there's anything woo-woo about that. I think that that's on the other side of heart opening that a lot of people avoid because they don't want the negative aspects of the emotion and the pain that can come through. But it's important to also comment on the positive aspect of heart opening, which is that you can start healing that feeling of being separate and alone and only being able to look at and care for yourself, and opens you up to such a beautiful wealth bank of love and connection, not only with your partnership, but also with life.
Yeah.
Like, it creates an intimacy with life itself to do that heart opening. And that heart opening is at the basis of empathy. Yeah. And it's one of the most beautiful gifts that you can have with life is that heart opening experience.
Yeah. I'm really excited for anyone who's listening to this who's going to open their heart, whether a little bit more or open it for the very first time, because it really is a beautiful experience. And so that's all we have for you today. We really hope that it's been helpful. If you have any questions, ask them in the comments. If there's something else you guys would like us to cover next time, please drop it in there. And until then, we'll see you later.